Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Overturning Tables, the podcast. I am Jonathan Bradner. This is
Terry. I just overturned the table. Yeah.
Oh, is that what that was?
Yep, that's what that was.
Fantastic. Where we take progressive theology from concept to practice. Before we really get into it, I do want to apologize for the audio issues of last episode. Wasn't the best. I did what I could with it. I did find out, Derek, that we talked about maybe the microphone closer, but your microphone was also turned backwards.
Oh.
So that didn't help.
We were virgins then. Now,
yes, long ago.
We have learned.
I've done a lot of playing around with our studio mics, and everything's fixed now. The dials are where they need to be, so we'll be good moving forward.
And I set up that one, so that was part of the problem. You set up yours. I set up mine.
Oh, so, yeah. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to look inside to see where the wires were. So.
Oh well, no, I definitely didn't do that. But we're here, and yeah,
we're here not in the studio that we fixed, but that's all right. Life happens. I'm feeling a little under the weather. We've got holidays coming up, so.
Yep, excited about the holidays.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to eat. Like
anything in particular?
Everything. Like
all the things.
Yeah, family is awesome, but I'm just really excited to eat. I eat every day, but I'm super excited about the big fancy familial meal, and then I'll take stuff home, and then I'll cook stuff at home. Like, it's my favorite. Christmas is my favorite holiday, but Thanksgiving is second.
Yeah, I am looking forward to Richie's sweet potato pie. Which, if you're not in Cincinnati, Richie's is a fried chicken place. It's a staple. It's an institution. And it's always funny when Default walks into Richie's and I order a whole sweet potato pie, and they say, "You know about our sweet potato pie?" And I said, "Oh, I know about your sweet potato pie."
I was about to say, I've never heard a white person go to Richie's, so I love this.
So good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So how are you doing? How's life?
Life is good, and I have my Little Mermaid mug. Little Mermaid fan club, the black one.
With a napkin.
Yeah, because it's hot. It's so weird. Like, I used to not be a coffee warmer upper, but then I started buying halfway decent coffee, and it's not bad to reheat it. So I reheat and almost burned my hand getting it out of the microwave, because who knew when you put something in the microwave it would come out hot? Like,
well, the behind the scenes scoop for everybody is that we were, on camera earlier, just talking before we started recording, and Derek went to go warm up the coffee, and I just hear in the background this scream almost, this squeal, and I was like, "Are you okay?"
And I did. I was like, I didn't know if you could hear me, and then so you said something, I was like, "Oh, yep." So hence the paper towel, and it was only in there 90 seconds, and it was like from the refrigerator, not the cup, but poured the coffee in from the refrigerator. But anyway, I'm just glad I had a coffee issue last episode with my Yeti.
You did,
because it like
it spilled everywhere.
It did.
That's right. I forgot about that.
It is, but it's super important, and I've already had like 3 things that I've done today with no coffee, and I'm like, this must stop.
So we're back at it. We are going to take a deep dive into politics. So just a quick PSA. While we are both reverends, we both are local church pastors. We are not speaking for our churches. We're not speaking in an official capacity. We are speaking for ourselves. Just living into how we feel we're called into this faith thing. So that's going to, especially today, include politics. So
Absolutely.
what do you get a lot of pushback when you hear, like, when you might mention like political theology or the church and politics?
Oh, absolutely. And I always like lean into Martin Luther King because people used to tell him that all the time. Like, you need to be concerned with the aspects of the church, and there are some Black denominations who are not political at all, and like they'll always leave it all up to Jesus. And I'm like, Jesus is the original political figure. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, people push back, and usually people push back when it's different than what they think. Like if I'm saying what they like, then it's awesome. But when I'm holding up a mirror or rejecting that or speaking of a different Christ or a different idea, then all of a sudden that's the issue. And we're seeing that right now, right? With this Christian nationalism. It's like, sports figures, they should just play sports unless you're Christian nationalist. Then they have the hand of God on them, and thank God for them. And
I have to believe that we're just bitter. Like we've seen it done to the detriment of society so much that it's easier just to say you're not allowed to do it than to actually do the work of doing it well, which can be messy. It can be dirty. It can be
absolutely
everything politics it can be. But I think with you, Jesus was the kind of original. I mean, he wasn't the original politician, but he was the original. Like, I think people like to equate the government that he lived in with ours and use as an excuse. When, like, I don't think Jesus would be a politician today, but like, do I think Jesus would like abstain from voting because it's politics? No.
There's a book. So Roland Morello, who I used to have a book club, and he actually came to talk about his bestseller in the book club, which is really cool. So we became like correspondents. And he wrote a book about someone like in present world running for president and saying he was Jesus and doing things that Jesus would do and acting like Jesus. And so Roland is not a theologian. So there's some like, but he's, just a salt of the earth, like decent human being who has a very like decent way, like we should treat people decently. We've disagreed in kindly disagreements, right? Like, because I think it's bigger and more systemic than some of the ways that he has this very like interpersonal way of dealing with people. Like people should just be nice to each other, which I think people should. But what happens when like institutions and systems have biases and are problematic as a practice? Like then it doesn't matter who individually is nice to me. This is my thought. Because if the institution or empire or system itself is racist, is sexist, is homophobic, is transphobic, that's will cause me more of a problem than an individual not being nice to me. Because some people will be really nice to you while they support these institutions that are trying to kill you. But the book was quite interesting. I'm gonna look it up really quickly. And I thought it made it like too simple, but it's Roland Murillo. He wrote Breakfast with Buddha, which is a book that I actually really, really, really like. But this,
Hmm.
and he also wrote Lunch with Buddha and Dinner with Buddha. There's a whole meal with Buddha thing going on.
Thanksgiving with Buddha.
Right. He also wrote like The Delight of Being Ordinary, which is about the Pope and the Dalai Lama going on a like escaping their lives and going on a road trip together. And of course, now I can't find that. But anyway, it's a really cool book. That American Savior, that's what it's called. American Savior, a novel of divine politics, when Jesus suddenly appears and runs for president. And so all that to say, like what would a Jesus presidential run look like? How would that be? What would Jesus say? And more than anything, that was really interesting is how would people who purport to love Jesus and the church and Christianity, how would people in those political spheres feel about someone in present day saying some of the things that Jesus said? That's what was really interesting. And like I said, it's not perfect. I don't even recommend it, but it caused me to think about like I went way deeper than the book does. But
well, there's that article, I guess it was Christianity Today, maybe, that came out of a pastor in the evangelical like sphere, and one of his parishioners coming up to reprimand him for bringing such progressive thoughts. Like how dare you think about progressive stuff in this church? And the pastor was kind of dumbfounded because it was the Beatitudes. He was just given the Beatitudes and the actual the teachings of Jesus Christ are too progressive.
Of course.
But the nerve to like have that point of view, that perspective within a Christian setting is wild to me. But it is pervasive. It is happening. But I think the one thing we can't do is say to the rest of us, you're not allowed to do it. Like, you can't do it. Because what that's led us into is now the only voice for Jesus in the political realm is the conservative white Christian nationalist voice. When that is not the only, like, I don't even recognize that Jesus. I don't know that man. Like, it shouldn't be. I remember when like Pete Buttigieg talked about I think he's Episcopalian, and like this was several years back at this point, and he talked about his faith. And I remember everybody just kind of going, what? Like, it was so dumbfounding that this gay man was talking about his faith while also being a politician. And it's just like, sure, do I want my politicians to advocate for the consensus? Like, if you live in an area, like Bernie Sanders does this every single time there's a vote on guns, he takes into his hunting population in Vermont. Vermont's a lot of hunters there. And so he votes according to the will of like the people he's supposed to serve. Like, as a politician, we should want that. But to also say that like you can just leave your faith at the door, that's not how life works. That's not how existence works to begin with. So, and I just think I just have to believe we're bitter, and that's why we just tell everybody you're not allowed to do it.
Yeah. But because of that, like to your point, people think then that Christianity is this white Christian nationalism,
right?
And people are surprised to find that I'm a Black gay Christian pastor. And so there are some people some people don't understand that. Well, how does that work is the question I get all the time. Or two, people then reject. People may reject, right? Like, oh no, you're just trying to, justify your sin or blah, blah, blah. You're leading all these people to hell. But then there are people who I see find hope, and they're like, I didn't think I could be a Christian. And so for me, that's why I agreed to do this podcast. That's why I'm telling people create content and get it out there, because we need to find the people who are looking for hope, community, like God. How do they find us if we don't amplify our message? Because
that's exactly right.
The other side does a really good job of amplifying the hate, what I would call hate. And so I keep being on this soapbox about what are we doing to amplify the message of the loving, affirming God. And it's not easy, because when you do that, people do attack your church. People do attack you. People, like, you will be persecuted, but that's a part of the work. Like, and I understand that not all of us have the same platform or have the same like ability or boldness, but we all have something that we can do to amplify the message of a loving, affirming God. So
that just actually happened on our church's TikTok page, because I did a trans day of remembrance, or of not remembrance.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Why can't I think of it? The word. Was it
resilience?
Was it okay?
What you did, but remembrance or resilience was the 20th.
Yeah. And so somebody had posted on there, like commented, and this was the church's page. Look, we found the one dude in the entire in all of Christianity who actually took the words of Jesus seriously. And like, at first I'm like, oh, thank you, but then it's like, it's just not true. Like, it is not true that I'm the only one, like, at all. In fact, like, almost every mainline, they call a mainline church, almost every mainline church now is open and affirming. You have the United Church of Christ, you have the Disciples of Christ, you have the ELCA, you have Episcopalians, Presbyterians, some branches of the Presbyterians.
More like Presbyterians.
Yeah, they're like, if you
United
I did the math.
Just did their
right. I did the math. That's 7 million Christians live under an open and affirming umbrella. Doesn't mean that 7 million Christians are, but there's 7 million Christians living under that umbrella. And when the Methodist Church fully gets their act together, that number doubles to 14 million open and affirming Christians. So like, we have to get that out there. Like, how I am not alone. You are not alone. We are not alone. There are so many of us.
That's the Open and Affirming Coalition, which is the LGBT nonprofit that services UCC churches, but not just UCC churches. We had a webinar on white Christian nationalism by April LaJoy, who's a content creator on TikTok and all the other things. She wrote this book, Star Spangled Jesus, and she gave an hour and a half webinar on white Christian nationalism. She grew up in that. Her father was a big pastor, and she inextricably linked her voting red with her Christian identity and view of God, and the whole idea that the United States was created by God for white Christians and a certain type of white Christians, and to have dominion and authority over this country and eventually over the world. And that's what she grew up in. That's what she believed. She does not believe that anymore. And so she creates content to kind of poke fun at herself in some of the thinking. And when I read her book, she talks about the 7 mountain mandate. I never knew that was a thing, but it's this idea of white Christian nationalism that the Christian church should use these 7 mountains to basically take back authority to God. Like, if you can control these 7 things, it's like media, the idea of family, education, like certain institutions, entertainment, the arts. If you control these 7 things, like they have these 7 spheres of influence, that will then help to perpetuate your idea, your theology. And so when she talked about that in the book, and when I did some research, it's really easy to be white Christian nationalist. People don't call themselves that, but it's really easy to be this type of fundamentalist Christian and only watch movies, television shows, radio, listen to radio programs, read books, have your kids. Like, it's really easy to live in a bubble where you're constantly getting only that information. Like, you can live a very basic life. And I don't know if your church gets them. I need to figure out how to stop getting them. We get these Christian blue pages.
Yeah.
Oh, I did it. I did not mean to do that.
You did.
These Christian blue pages, which is like, these are Christian organizations. This is where you should spend your money. This is where you should do your thing. And so I'm not saying that we need to take over these 7 things. But as I'm looking at this list and as I'm reading, I'm like, what is the progressive alternative? Like, why don't we have a more concerted effort of creating content and resources and getting those out there to people so that they're not surprised? People come on my TikTok and say, I didn't know a church like yours existed. And I'm like, where do you live? Let's go to openandaffirming.org. I can find you a church in your area. I can find you churches online. And it just blows people's minds. And that's us problem. Like, what aren't we doing? Is that why haven't people found us? Why haven't we been easier to find?
Yeah. So if she voted red because of her connection to Christianity, if you vote blue, do you think you vote blue because of your faith?
I think it's a huge part of it, and not all of it. But when I hear stuff like mass deportation, my faith, part of it's social, part of it's other things, but part of it is my faith for people unlike myself. Like, I was born in this country, right? I for generations, we don't want to talk about how I got here, but but I side with other populations with my vote. So a woman's right to autonomy over her body. I'm not a woman. So when people ask me, what do you think about abortion? I'm like, I'm a man. I think that is a choice between a woman and her doctor. I feel like I have no say in that. Like, but I want to protect that right for other people. And my faith informs that. Whereas some people feel like their faith informs something else. But I also think that a lot of times progressive Christians are trying not to be those type of Christians. So, we feel like, oh, I don't want to proselytize. I don't want to, I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So sometimes we just like gripe to each other instead of actually speaking truth to power and actually like being bold and even helping people, like having some of those conversations with individuals. You hear or see them say something that's problematic. Sometimes we'll just shut down instead of educating or informing. And there's a way to do that. And I also understand that not everyone is called to do that. So I don't like, poo-poo on people who don't do that. But my faith distinctly differently.
I hear that. And I mean, it does deserve a small footnote that there is only so much that we can say from the pulpit, but it's not as complicated as people think it is. You can't advocate for campaigns, political campaigns, or politicians.
Yep.
Beyond that, we're fine. We're good to go according to the law. Some might, I guess, go on to talk about the ethics of doing that, but and a lot of people don't know that that's because we're nonprofits.
Right.
It has nothing to do with being church. If in fact, some conservative churches have made the decision to give up their nonprofit status so that they can do and say whatever they want to do and say. I'm not saying churches in the progressive realm should be doing that. I think we can do our work without naming politicians and supporting them. I think we can. I also probably wouldn't be upset if a left-leaning church decided to do that. I don't think I would be angry or be like, "What are you possibly doing?" But yeah, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about what churches can or cannot do, especially when it, like you were saying earlier, when it doesn't line up with your value system. And it's just not how the way things work. We have the First Amendment rights as everybody else does. Thomas Jefferson, who also said there should be a separation of church and state, not in the Constitution, but in a letter to a group of Baptist ministers, I think it was. Maybe it was Methodist ministers. But that phrase never appears in the Constitution. But he also said later in another writing that if you were to handcuff pastors from being political, you are only stripping them from their First Amendment rights, and we can't. That shouldn't be the case either. The separation of church and state as an ethos, not as a literal declaration that happens in the Constitution, is to keep the church or from the state from instituting a state religion, a state-sanctioned religion,
Exactly.
and or undermining religions. It was more of to keep the top from coming down than the bottom from coming up. So I think there's just a lot of misconceptions around that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And there's also a lot of people who, and I may have said this in a previous episode, there's a lot of people who, okay, back up. So when we did when April did the White Christian Nationalist webinar, I read a disclaimer that, because the Open and Affirmative Coalition is a 501c3 nonprofit. So these views reflect her, not us. And she brought it up, which is very true. She said, it's so funny, when you disown me in the disclaimer, she's like, these other groups that are nonprofits too are clearly promoting their politician and their politics and the people that they want. And so there's a big rush on the left to take nonprofit status away from churches. All churches, blanket. I see graphics all the time. Like, if churches pay taxes, it would do this. And then they'll show like a church that doesn't look like my church or your church, that, new and modern and glass and acreage, or they'll show like a pastor who makes way more than we will ever make in this thing. And so for a lot of people, you don't go to church, you don't have a connection to churches like ours. This is what you think the church is, and this is what you think the church does. And so my concern and worry is what happens what happens if that does gain momentum? Like, what happens if the left, if people think that is a political win to take away nonprofit status from churches? My church and all the work that we do could not survive that, could not survive 20% of our income going to something else. Like, our community would lose a ministry partner. Like, the people would miss out. But I think that also goes back to a messaging for progressive Christians. Like, if people don't see or know what we're doing, then it's really easy to say the church, big C, and lump us in with the churches that will either, one, just pay it, or two, have the resources to do what wealthy people do and figure out how not to have to pay so much taxes. So then, to me, it makes it even worse, because then if you take away nonprofit status, then those churches can say and do whatever they want. Churches like mine close, and then we've literally lost the church. And I preached a sermon once about, you remember when Mary and Joseph lost Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
and he was, in the temple, being about,
Yeah.
God's business. And I did this whole sermon about what happens when the church loses Jesus. Like, what happens when the institutions that have been supposed to protect the idea of the Beatitudes, like if you grew up in
Mm-hmm.
church, I learned the Beatitudes, the 23rd Psalms, the Lord's Prayer. Like, these are all like things you learn, right? Like, what happens when the Beatitudes are too political for your faith? That's
Yeah.
creepy. That's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes all back to the bitterness thing. I mean, people are bitter about the 1% of churches that are too big or too this or too that,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And it's valid, but it just dismisses the reality of every other church in existence, the other
Yeah.
99%. And like, even just on like a strategy point, taking this from concept to practice, even like at their worst, like churches on the corner, little churches on the corner, at their worst are kind of like senior centers.
Yeah.
They are the club. They are the club. It's old people getting together and gossiping. Absolutely. Like,
Yep.
that's at its worst. Besides like advocating for policy that hurts us,
Yeah.
right, or hurts others. But that's kind of like the concept of what church is like, it's either the mega church or it's a bunch of old ladies gossiping. And even as a strategy point, even if you tax those churches and they close, guess what you're now doing? You're paying more in your taxes for more senior care because they're
Yep.
not getting it at a church that they pay into.
Yep.
Now there has to be more senior centers. There has to be more, clubs and activities. And that's it. If you close down the worst of us,
Yeah.
you're just eliminating a senior center, basically.
Exactly.
Like, great, like, cool, well done, I guess.
And you're not reducing those votes. It's not changing the political landscape at all. But what it's doing is giving institutions that do have the money more power, because like in some way now people are at least trying to follow the rules. I would argue that progressive churches tend to follow the rules more than the other side, and that's especially depending on where you are. Like, we're in Ohio, so people will feel like the legislature is on their side. You remember a couple years ago when it was the big abortion ballot initiative, I guess last year, maybe earlier this year, last year, and there were churches that had huge signs, like huge, encouraging people to vote in favor of the abortion ban, like whatever the in favor was. And it was a kid in my confirmation class, and we had talked about separation of church and state, and we talked about, rules and that kind of thing. And he was like, so how are these churches able to do that? And I said, well, technically, because it's not a politician, it's a ballot initiative. They can do that. He said, well, why aren't we, like, why doesn't our sign, like, why don't we have a big sign that says this? I said, well, because when we talked about it, we've decided to not do that because we feel that the church doesn't have a place in advocating for, like, we advocate what we're for, but not, specific ballot initiatives, or not, like, it was a choice that the church made. And this is how we advocate for what we're for. And this is the way we're doing it. We're just not attaching ourselves physically to that. And it was so interesting to see a 14-year-old, 13, 14-year-old. Like, he's like, well, then why don't they think like that? And I was like, well, he said, so it's just like,
stop asking questions, please.
Yeah, it's like, it seems like we're trying to follow these rules and like, really thinking what is the best use of the space. He was processing it, and I get it. And just that idea just made me it made me really uncomfortable doing the opposite with that sign.
Mhm.
And so, and I think that's exactly what we see. But the people who are saying tax to church, tax to church, tax to church, they don't talk to people like me. They don't get that. They don't know the average church in this country before COVID was 88 members. And I can name 20 pastors right now who don't see 88 people on Sunday. Like, that's
Right.
so we know that number is post-COVID has to be smaller. So these are not the churches
Right.
that will hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. The average pastor in Ohio makes between $40,000 and $60,000. That's the average. But I would say many pastors are working 2 jobs. And oh, by the way, we're taxed. Like, we are taxed. We are self-employed individuals. So we have to pay 15.3% out of our paycheck. There is a way that you can get around it. I saw a TikTok actually just today that was like, pastors do this. They bypass all of their taxes by just claiming this. And it's like, if you want pastors, there is a way to go around paying all of your taxes if you wanted to. If you wanted to give up every single social net possible. So you have to claim a moral stance against Social Security and Medicare. Like, you have to, and you can never get it back. Like, that is an irrevocable decision.
Exactly.
Right. So if you do that, I mean, like, the only people I know that do that are unethical evangelicals, because that's where it seems to happen the most.
Yeah.
Because they know they'll be fine. The church will take care of them.
Money. Yeah.
Or you're Amish, which they do have a moral conviction against those things. So it's like, more power to you. But less than 10% of pastors, I actually looked this up this week for a whole different reason, and less than 10% of pastors do that thing because it's such a risk. Like, why would you make that decision and then you get in a car accident the next day? You are done.
Yep, you can't get.
You're done.
Yeah.
So
I pay all my taxes, and I have to pay city taxes where you live, where I live, where I work, where so all of these, all these things add up, and the donations that people give to the church have been taxed. Like, that's the whole point. Like, people give out of their income, and
they're already taxed. Yeah,
exactly. So, and yeah, we don't operate at a profit. That's literally the whole point. It's like, this is a nonprofit. Like, we operate on most churches I know on a shoestring budget that is able to, that has decided that we're going to keep the ministry, and if there's a building, the building going as a resource for the community, and taking on the extra burden of taking those resources that we have and earning more to do good, like you said, with the old people, or with the unhoused, or with the hungry, or like, there are things that we do. Like, we see someone, oh my goodness, this person doesn't have a coat, this person doesn't have the proper shoes. We don't pray for them. We make sure that they get what they need. And this is like what small churches do all day, every day. How many times pastors pay for people's meal, do stuff that people don't even know about. It's I remember my pastor growing up, people would just come up to the church, like come up to him. He'd be lined, like people would be lined up talking about what was going on in their lives. And he's handing them money. During COVID, when COVID happened, I knew there were people in my church who, if they didn't work, they didn't get paid. Like, depending on the type of job you had, like certain things you can't do from home. Certain things, like if someone works a certain job, if they don't do that job, then they're independent contractor, they're a house painter. If you're not painting houses during COVID, you're not getting any money. And so I worked out something where I would tell people, if you need help paying something, let me know. I would then take it to the church and say, we have a member who can't pay their phone bill. And then I was the middle person. So I was the only one who knew who was getting the
Right.
help. And we literally set up a social service ministry just like that. And I would like reach out to people and say, hey, do you have food? Do you have this? Do you have that? And and the church was in place ready to do that because we had community and we had things that were happening.
And how common that is, not even just in progressive churches.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, for as much as you want to politically disagree with evangelical churches,
absolutely,
they do the same thing.
Absolutely.
They do. So if you close them down too, you are going to have to pay more in taxes for benefits to the community.
And that's true. Because there are small evangelical churches that will die too.
Mm-hmm. And so you were talking about the author earlier when she was talking about being disowned by the Open and Affirming Coalition, but not other nonprofits. To be mad at the church for being political is to deny the essence and purpose that every other nonprofit exists for.
Exactly.
Every single nonprofit exists because of politics, because of either a political failure or political success. That's why nonprofits exist. And those nonprofits all advocate for policy on local, state, and national levels. All of them do. That's why they exist. Think of one nonprofit that exists not because policy failure, but because they just want to. Like, that doesn't happen.
There's a need.
There's a need.
Mm-hmm.
So to just single out churches, I guess I can understand that you might be an atheist, which is like great, like fine. But for me to not be able to have a vote or a voice because you believe God's fake and a spaghetti monster, like, where does that come from? Like, I don't get that.
I've seen a lot of, like, we have atheists and agnostic and people who are just like, I don't know, like people who come to our church, people who are members, because what the church also provides is community. And I keep yelling, like if I'm yelling anything right now, it's avoid isolationism and like build community. I keep doing stuff.
For those of you who are listening and not watching, the platform we are using, if you do certain hand signals, some sort of emoji or balloons will pop up. And Derek has now done that twice. So for those of you who are listening, that's what's happening.
You're like, what's happening? So I got balloons and then a thumbs up just came up. But that's what it is. I'm telling people, community. When people ask, like April, so what can we do? Like, if we know this exists, like, how do our churches, like, what's something that progressive churches can do? And that practical part, she said, there are so many in the evangelical sphere. There's so many opportunities for people to build community. And I've noticed that with some of these mega churches, that people who go there, I know people who go to some of these churches who don't align with their political ideology, but they say they go there because of their kids. Oh, the kids really love the children's church. They really love this. They really love that. And, the affinity groups. So it's not the mega church is not what's keeping the people. It's the small group aspect that building those communities. And so most churches are small. We have the small group thing. At least, we should have the small group thing down. So how do we take advantage of that? Because these big churches are always trying to figure out how to make people feel more intimate in Six Flags Over Jesus, where we have that. So how do we, build community and encourage that? And we saw that a lot during COVID, where a lot of churches were struggling. Our church did well because we had community. So I didn't do COVID sermons on Facebook, like just talking to the computer. We did them in Zoom. So we're all in the space. We checked in with one another. So everybody, if you wanted to just talk about what's going on. Just, how you're feeling. And
Yeah.
I could see on Facebook people talking and sharing pictures and recipes and, meeting to go for a walk in the neighborhood. So all of that happened because of the community that was established before the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, and this may be a whole nother podcast, but I think our role as pastors, and any pastor out there looking or listening or watching, is moving forward as we prepare for the church of the 22nd century, because we're already a quarter of the way through this one, is to decenter Sunday morning worship as what it means to go to church. And when we do that, we open the doors. We don't lose our folks. We open the doors to others. So, for example, our church now a couple times a year. Well, we've done it. We've done it twice. We started it about midway through the year, but instead of doing the Sunday morning worship, we do a service. We do a service project during the hour of normal worship. And we started doing that because the thought was that less people come for holiday weekends. So why go through, should we really go through this all the music rehearsal, all the prep, all this, or could we build something new here? So we started doing service projects on those Sundays, and more people show up to that than normal worship.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean worship is not important. It doesn't mean that you should get rid of worship altogether. I'm not saying that in the least bit. What I am saying is that we need to then create space for something else to happen, for a space for those who your worship looks like the church that hurt me. So
Right.
I can't do it. Okay, then let's provide another space and opportunity for you to be in community, instead of forcing it down that Sunday morning is what it means to be to church and we can't change it. I think that is really our deepest call right now as pastors, is to create space that looks different.
It's very true. And get out of our buildings, even because I've talked to people and they have said, if I could go to church, I would go to your church. But I cannot go to church because of, for whatever thing. And so
He's making hand motions, everybody.
yeah, I'm doing but I was afraid. I was like, I don't want anything to happen. Like lasers start shooting out. But so I'm like what are the other parts of church? Church doesn't have to be, okay, here's a hymn, here's a scripture, here's a sermon. What if we go to the library? Cincinnati has an amazing library system where you can get, a room free all day long. Or if we go to a coffee house and we just talk and, pass the mic.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this? And it doesn't have to be heavy stuff. It could be fun stuff. It could be, it could be, but with any regularity, just letting people know that my church, this church, a ministry, or a group of, you can come up with a really cool name, the Justice League Cincinnati, is going to be meeting at this coffee shop on this time for just some positive whatever. Or, you take your church tent and set it up somewhere and you're just giving away coffee and, again, we're not proselytizing, but we're letting people know human connection is here, and you don't ever have to come into the building to get this and to make that. I think we have to watch, so many of us were trained that church growth, getting more butts in the pews on Sunday and having, people be, conversions through baptism and, new members. But what does it mean to be a member of a church? Because there are people who consider themselves members who may have never signed anything, who have never gone to a new members class, but in their mind, they're connected with your church. You're their pastor. That's their church. So how do how do we do that? And for most of us, with seminary prepared us to pastor a certain type of church. And it's not the type of church I have. It's not a core, like, seminary prepares you to pastor a church and has way more money than my church and way more people. So, and, like a better, fuller staff than, so like, what does that look like? And what does it mean to be connected without the Sunday morning? Like, and without the goal of getting them there on Sunday morning. Because I think that happens sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, if we can get people to come out to this, then we can, get them to come on Sunday morning. And like, what if they don't ever want to come on Sunday morning?
Yeah. I think another shift in perspective, especially from the pastoral standpoint, is the understanding that we are community organizers. Through and through. I just happen to have mostly the same community every week, but we are community organizers. And I say that also for folks that are outside of the church. I beg and plead you, if you never step foot in my church and you live in the Cincinnati area, but you believe in serving the least of these and loving your neighbor, use us. Use us. Use our people. Use our time. Use our building. Use our endowment. Please.
He has an endowment. We are poor.
This is true. Not every church has an endowment. 20% of churches do, and the average is $500,000. I did all this earlier this week for a whole nother reason. It's just coming back. But I mean, just look for us and use us. Use us for community space. I mean, we have our building is now used 5 days the week. Like throughout the entire week, there is a different community using it that is not connected to the church. And that's beautiful. Like we have the building still. We have a lot of empty space still. So I that's not to diminish or downplay the harm that the church has done.
But
I get it. I get it. I understand it. But if you have an institution that has power that you can tap into, maybe let's try that. Let's try to see what that looks like.
Absolutely. And that's something that can be life-giving to the churches. Because for some of the smaller churches with some of the big buildings, it can, if you're not opening the doors more and being a community partner, it could actually be I sometimes consider it a poor use of the resources that God has given us. Because then you'll say, oh my goodness, we're paying $200,000 a year to use this space 5-6 hours a month. That's a sin and a shame. When there are people who are paying money to hotels to rent a room, or paying money to for-profits to rent space, where we have the space. I don't know about your church, but we're not taking the heat up and down during the week because that's expensive. Like that's super expensive. And so like it's here, it's empty. Yeah, we have to buy a little bit more toilet paper, but is that a big deal? Like I just shrug my shoulders if you're listening.
And it's like, and the opportunity there is we do have a senior group that meets there twice a week. Again, not connected to our church at all. And we had an issue with our floor, and this senior citizen group who doesn't, they like, I guess they collect funds maybe once or twice a year to make it like a free will donation to the church, but we haven't asked for it. Not only do they do that, but they also raised almost $2,000 to help us fix the floor.
Exactly.
I mean, otherwise, and one could argue, they would be wrong, that their use of the floor maybe contributed to the wear and tear on the building, for which I say, just close your doors now.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and close your doors now, if that's what your concern is. And that's really maybe mean to say, but I mean, it's going to happen now or in 10 years. You take your pick.
Yeah. And but it's like for us, we've had issues with break-ins. And some of it I could very easily argue is because of some of our progressive stance. It's so funny because like people call it progressive, but it's just like loving God's people. Like
Right.
we say Black trans lives matters. Like, but what happened is when that happened and we needed to beef up our security system, the community responded. Like people who never step foot because they say, I don't go to church, but I want your church to exist. And when I'm sitting around the table with the barons, the people who have the money, the developers, because I'm in a community that it's constantly trying to be the next rich community, right? So there's like, what do we bring in? What do we do? And I'm always reminding people, because there are people who love us being there, and there are people who wish we would sell and become a condo. Or, like a microbrewery. They love turning churches around here into microbreweries.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm like, church communities need institutions. Churches are institutions. And who else will remind you that there are poor people here too? Who else will remind you like that do we have to look out for the least of the like who I'm the fly in the ointment sometimes. The one who's saying, I've been in meetings, people say, oh, if they can't afford this and they can't afford to live in this neighborhood. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Do you hear what you're saying? Like, listen to what you're saying. And that's the point. Like, that's also pastors. Like, we're not just community organizers. We are we should be activists and speaking for those who are not at the table that sometimes we do get to sit at simply because of our position. I get to sit at certain tables to represent and to provide a voice to that. So I would not say that makes me a politician, but it gives me some political sway that I'm constantly thinking, who should be at this table? Why aren't they here? And what would they say? What do they need to say? What needs to be known?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're at 50 something minutes here. And we didn't even get to the topic I had talked to you about before. So how do you feel? Do you like shorter episodes or longer episodes?
I don't know.
How do you consume your podcasts?
I listen to some podcasts that are 20 minutes, and then I listen to some that can go on for like 2 or 3 hours. Like, I don't listen to it all at once, but like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we could go ahead and maybe end this one here, and then next podcast we'll talk about canceling our obsession with empire.
Boom!
Just a small thing.
Yeah, that is.
Cutting the cord. So we appreciate you all being here with us for this episode of Overturning Tables, the podcast. We have been the Revs.
I just overturned the table again.
Maybe there's like a little toy table that we can just kick over. And again, let us know your feedback. We are now on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and everywhere else you can get your podcasts. Please support us by sharing and liking or subscribing, doing those things. I don't know, whatever other podcasters say.
Yep. I need to follow us on all those things. I'm a terrible co-host.
Well, apparently you don't have to follow us. If Derek's not even following us, why should you?
No, I'm going to. I'm doing it right now, and you should too.
All right, take care, everybody. And if you're watching this before Thanksgiving, happy holidays. Have a safe time. Enjoy your food. Also, fight the empire within Thanksgiving itself.
Absolutely.
But we also recognize that it is a time for family and friends. If you know somebody's alone, maybe give them a call and say hi, check on them. Anything else, Derek?
Nope, that's it. I was going to suggest that too, that you find people, make sure that no one is alone, unless they want to be alone. But people are looking for something. We always ask the church, is anyone need somewhere to go on Thanksgiving? All right, we'll find somewhere for you to go. So
yeah, great.
Don't overturn the table.
Not at Thanksgiving.
Not at Thanksgiving. No. All right, take care. I did the balloons again, so I was super excited.
I don't have that power.
I think you gotta be committed to it.
Nope.
Maybe
you're getting balloons. I'm not.
Let's say maybe white fingers cannot get.
Maybe that's it.
This is a form of reparation.
And scene.